We're going to begin painting some backgrounds with patterns today, and we're going to start with a really light tint for the background. So as a review, tints are white with a little bit of color added, and here's my white with a little bit of magenta added because I want a really light kind of pink background for this first one. So this I'm going to mix together. So I'm going to start with this really pale magenta, kind of pink, and just fill in my whole paper. This is my base color, and we want to make sure that we're going back and forth, just gliding across the paper. Keep this really a thin, smooth application of color. We want this to dry fairly quickly, so don't make it too thick and chunky. Okay, so now I'm going to clean my brush and set this aside to let it dry. While we are waiting for our solid color background to dry, let's talk about what things we can use to dip into paint to stamp patterns onto the backgrounds. So one thing that is really easy to get a hold of is a cotton swab. So of course you could use a cotton swab to dip in a cardboard tube. A cork is always handy to have. Cut off pieces of foam tubing that you can carve into and create texture and patterns. Empty tape rolls, sponges cut into shapes are always helpful, or pretty much anything that you have that is something you can either wash or throw away, you could dip into paint. And I have a fondness for round things, so I usually have a collection of round things, but they don't have to be round. You can have different shapes. Now when you're stamping, you want to be able to really get into the paint, so a little palette with wells might not work. So having something larger like a lid or a plate or a tray is helpful. So we're using this lid for today, and we're going to get started with something that is one of my favorite things to use as a stamping tool, and that is a cork. So if I take this cork and I dip it into some paint, and I don't want it to be too drippy, so I want to just try to get any excess off, and I can use that by tapping it a few times on the paint tray or on a scrap paper or something, and then just taking it and pressing down very firmly. And there you go, you've got a round pattern. And the nice thing about this is it is also washable, so you could wash that and use it again. Now another option is you could use, for larger pieces, you could use pool noodles or any kind of foam that you might have from packing material. This is very much the consistency of like a pool noodle or a pipe insulation piece, but you can cut into this and get sort of a striped texture. So let's see what that does for us. And again, trying to get like any excess off before putting it onto your paper. And that gives you a little bit of a different mark. If you made these cuts a little bit deeper, the paint wouldn't get into the crevices, but because this is squishy, it is still sort of giving you a solid circle. So that might not be the best option. Cotton swabs are great. You can dip them into the paint and get really small dots. Always love using cotton swabs. Cardboard tubes. So any kind of cardboard tube, from like a paper towel roll or a aluminum foil or plastic wrap, something like that, save the tube, and you can dip that into the paint. You could even use a brush to apply the paint to the rim and then stamp with it, but Same thing, just press it down. And obviously you can't wash this because it's cardboard, but you could let the paint dry and just use it over and over again. And then tape rolls, if you remember to save these when your tape runs out, these are awesome. Same kind of thing, you dip it into the paint to get the paint around the rim and press it down. And the difference is that these are plastic, so they are washable, and you can get different sized open circles that way. And then the last thing I want to show you, this is really great. So you get just regular kitchen sponges, and when you first buy them, you want to cut them into whatever shape you want. So this is sort of a flower shape that I used for a different project. But what you can do is either stamp this right into your paint, or you could even paint the sponge. So younger kids are probably going to want to stamp it into a tray, but just for the sake of this, I'll show you that you can apply paint to the sponge, especially if you don't want it to be too thick. And then you're just going to lay it down on your paper and give it a press. Now if you use a paintbrush, you'll probably see a lot more of that sponge texture, whereas if you dip it, the paint might fill in all of the little nooks and crannies of the sponge, and you might not see as much of a sponge texture. And then you just take it up, and these are totally washable and reusable, so they're great for using, especially with kids. So there's some stamping techniques that you can use, and we'll apply these to our backgrounds. Alright, so our painted papers are totally dry, and you might notice that some of them have started to curl up. So there's a few ways to combat this. One way, and the easiest way, is just to put this under heavy books and let it flatten before you go on to the next step. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to tape them down. So I have the one that I made on camera with the white and magenta for the light pink tint. And then I have this one that was made off camera that has sort of a ombre from blue to purple to pink. Right there, a little water dot got on it, so that's why you have a little mark there. But this would be a nice background as well, and we'll use that for something in a future lesson. So for this, we're going to get started with this pink one, and I'm just going to tape it right down on the corners just for the sake of the video. Okay, so we're all taped down, paper's not going anywhere, and I'm going to use the circle tape roll because I love circles. So we're going to make our pattern with this circle tape roll with some purple and magenta paint, since that is what is out, but you could do anything that you want. So I'm going to start with the darker color, the purple, and just dip my tape roll in and start making my repeating pattern. So a pattern is, of course, something that repeats. So I'm going to be overlapping my purple circles with straight magenta circles to give it a little bit of dimension. Okay, there is my paper finished, pattern complete. This is going to need to set aside and completely dry before I do anything with it, but please check out other videos where we are going to be using this background.